Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Captain's Log, an accountant's guide to the galaxy, and this episode is Stardate 221031. Now, one thing that I'm keen to get across is that accountants have personalities, and yes, it's a dry industry, but that doesn't mean we can't have a little bit of fun with it. So I want to bring some personal interests into the podcasts, to the shows. I also want to use that sort of like that passion that I have for outside of work activities to show how you can help grow your business or to run it better. One of the things you can see behind me is that I'm a massive nerd with all of my Spider-Man, Iron Man pictures that I've got up, but also I'm a sports fan as well. I love football and also Formula One. I have been a lifelong Formula One fan. Now, this episode, it is called Budgeting Gives You Wings. It's a bit of a play on word because Red Bull gives you wings. And yes, there's been a bit of a kerfuffle in the world of sporting budgeting, which who knew that accountancy would be such a hot topic, especially in the world of Formula One. It's got to the realms where people are discussing, should accountants really be in charge of who wins a world title? For the record, no, I don't think that we should. We shouldn't have any place in the day-to-day sport. Like, we should absolutely be in the background. But unfortunately, because of the Formula One budget cap, accountants and that sort of practice, it's been thrown into the spotlight. And yes, it's all rather unnecessary. So what I want to get into is some of the areas where I think Red Bull may have gone wrong. Now, the reason for this is I had a different topic pick for today's show, but I've put that on the back burner because on Twitter there's a guy, Statman, Virtual Statman, and he'd said he doesn't feel qualified to offer judgment on Red Bull's budget predicament. And I messaged to say, well, actually, as an accountant, I do feel like I'm qualified to offer an opinion on this. And there was people that were defending Red Bull. There were people that were going out all guns blazing for them, calling them cheats, etc. Let's make my position perfectly clear on this. I'm not a Lewis Hamilton fan, but I'm not a Lewis Hamilton hater. I'm neutral. I'm not a Max Verstappen fan. I'm not a Max Verstappen hater. I'm neutral. And when it comes to Red Bull and Mercedes, I don't hate or love either team. I have allegiances to other teams such as McLaren and Williams. So I have no axe to grind in this matter. That being said, I'm sure someone will still be like, oh my God, you said this, that means you hate such and such. I don't hate, because you know what? It's a sport and it's not worth it. So here's the areas where I think Red Bull went wrong and some lessons that you can learn from it. So the first one is that most teams, and I think I'm right in saying 9 out of the 10, they all did a dry run. They had a practice at being compliant with the budget cap. So let's backtrack on that. The budget cap came in, it was proposed a few years ago, and it was aimed at one of a raft of measures at leveling the playing field so that all teams, no matter how big or small, could compete. It kind of seemed like some small teams were priced out the market, that they were never going to be competitive. So they brought in a budget cap, which was aimed at reducing costs and also making it like it's a sustainable sport. It means other teams could potentially enter. They know what the maximum spend will be. The first year that this was a sort of thing was 2020. And that's when most of the teams did a dry run. Red Bull didn't. Now, you might think that will never come back to bite them on the bum. Well, it has now. So most teams did this dry run, which meant that they'd got some practice in. They knew the drill. And Not all of them got it right. So let's just look at this. There's 10 teams in Formula One. 7 of them are 100% totally compliant. One of the teams, which is Williams, they fell down a little bit because they submitted late. They were late filing their homework. Another team is Aston Martin. They fell foul because they made some mistakes. And it seems similar to some of the mistakes that Red Bull had made. However, they were within the cost cap making those mistakes. And then you had Red Bull, who seemed to have fallen foul on several fronts, unfortunately. And one of them is that they've overspent. They spent more money than what they were allowed. So this is something where you maybe need to think about this in your business. If there's a change in legislation that's coming up or a change in working practice, don't wait until it actually happens to start doing those things. Implement it in advance so you can do some practice runs. You can see where the weaknesses are in your supply chain or your operating ways. Don't wait until the last minute to do this. Do a dry run before, and then you'll know what to expect. You'll know what boxes to put information in, which comes on to the next point. So there's a lot of argument about how much Red Bull have actually breached the cost cap by. The official line is it's 2.2 million. And then other people say, no, it's only 400,000. The facts are, and this is backed up by the FIA statement, is that Red Bull overspent the budget cap by 2.2 million. If, and it's a big if they had applied a tax credit correctly, it would only have been 400,000. But the facts are, it's still an overspend. So here's one. The accuracy just simply wasn't there. They'd incorrectly applied a tax credit. It's not been divulged what that is. I imagine the size of it, it's probably an R&D tax credit, which maybe that's where the confusion's come from, because typically this is claimed like a year or two after accounts have been finalised. So maybe that's where the discrepancies come from. But all other teams would have been eligible to claim R&D. But they've managed to apply it correctly. So this may come back to that first point, that doing a dry run, they would have found out the problems. But this second lesson now is do things correctly. Accuracy is important. An example of this is over the past couple of years in small businesses, we've had multiple grants and income streams that we wouldn't normally have. There's been, I nearly said a word that would almost get this podcast show given a strike on Spotify and YouTube, but for a certain period of times that started in 2020, there was grants available. There was also furlough grants for staff, loads and loads. Depends on how you categorize them. It was either income or not. And some grants were and should have been put down as income, other ones shouldn't. It just depends on what it was. So this lesson here is understand all of the income that comes into business and categorize it correctly, because it's important. You don't want to be taxed on income that isn't taxed. Equally, if something should be taxable, you don't want to miss it out, because HMRC won't like that. They will come after you and they will issue penalties. Next, what's happened? Well, this one's a bit messy. So there was a joke going around that Red Bull hadn't really overspent on the car performance. It was the catering budget. I just thought that was a bit of a joke to start with. However, turns out there's an element of truth in that, because the cost areas where they seem to be lacking was catering. That was one. National insurance, that was an area. They had not recharged correctly between different areas of the business. They hadn't correctly allocated used spare parts. There was staffing cost issues. Now, as you can tell from that list, this isn't just one small area. there's quite a few areas where they've fallen down. Again, this comes down to accuracy, and it's something that I feel it's fairly basic. Catering, I don't know how. There's people in the pits, the drivers, they need to eat. I don't know why that wouldn't be included, but that's not for me to decide. Ones that I think we could look at now is unused spare parts. Now, you might be sitting there walking, wherever you're listening to this show, thinking, I don't have spare parts in my business. Actually, a lot of businesses have something called work in progress, or they carry stock. And that could be your equivalent of this unused spare parts. You need to correctly allocate it, because that could be a legitimate cost within this year's accounts, or it could be a future year. So you need to allocate that correctly. Staffing costs, that was one where they seem to have made a bit of a blunder. I've heard that it's to do with gardening leave and sick pay, and it's been put into the wrong business unit. This is something that you can look at with your business. Do you have business units? Certainly from my point of view, I do, because we've got different aspects that we look at, such on the wrong side here. So you've got accountancy, consultancy, training, speaker. There's different members of staff that focus on different areas. It's important for me to make sure I allocate the staff costs correctly to those areas. And the same should have applied to Red Bull for a few reasons. One is it gives you an accurate picture of how well that business unit is doing. But the other one is, as I mentioned, they had a tax credit. Correctly allocating costs will affect how readily available the information is to collect for a R&D's tax claim. It would make it easier to submit. It will make it easier just to look at your accounts and know how well you're doing in that business. So this is something that I really feel we can all learn lessons from here. When new legislation's coming through, do a dry run, get practice in. It's important. It's important that you understand how systems work, because no matter how good your systems are, there will always be weaknesses in that chain. Accuracy is important. Make sure you're allocating income into your business correctly. It will affect how well your business does from a cash flow point of view, but also it affects your taxation position potentially. Then, when you're allocating costs, this is important, because if you get it wrong, you won't know if your business is profitable or not. So these are the lessons that we can learn from what's happened with Red Bull. I'm not hating on them. It's a massively complicated area. I'm surprised, quite frankly, that more teams haven't got it wrong. Maybe the fact that they practiced, that maybe they all got it wrong in that first year. Who knows? But it didn't matter, because that was the dry run. Anyway, not going to go on about it too much more, because otherwise I'll get hate mail from Red Bull fans, and I'm honestly not hating on them. So I said that I want to bring you up to date with news and basically any updates that's happening out there that will affect you and your business. It's actually been quiet recently, to be fair, and that's nice, because it went through a phase where every day I was waking up wondering, I wonder who the Chancellor is today, and I wonder what new tax or they'll bring in or take away. There should have been an autumn statement, which is when we find out, it's like the state of the nation. We find out how the economy is doing, and also any planned tax changes. That should have been today at the time of recording, 31st of October. And it was postponed. And I'm so grateful that it was, because the Chancellor remains the same, which that's brilliant. We're getting a little bit of consistency. However, when the autumn statement was announced, the Prime Minister has changed. And I think it would be foolish to have moved forward with an autumn statement, talked about tax changes, and they might not be in alignment with the new PM. So it's been delayed. It's now the 17th of November. So hopefully we're going to have a couple of weeks where things will be pretty stagnant from a tax change point of view, because believe me, after the past 2 months, pretty much had my fill of tax changes. So hopefully next week I'll be able to bring you some updates from a software point of view for things like Xero, QuickBooks, Free Agent, Dext, and absolutely no tax changes, because, well, We don't need any. We've had enough. We just need some stability now and find out what's going on. Right, so I want to thank you for tuning in today. If you're watching this on YouTube, please give it the thumbs up if you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you're listening to on a podcast, please do like it. And I would absolutely love it if you could share this with your friends and business colleagues, anyone that you think can get value from it. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been Carl Ford, the captain of accountancy, and I am signing out for another episode, and I'll see you next week.